Everything starts with mindset. But I want to kind of transition as we were kind of talking about the things and what it takes to execute. And there's a really good framework from a book that we both read a long time ago when it first released. It's been 10 years or more that book's been out. And it's the 4 Ds of execution. And I would love for you to kind of walk us through the 4 Ds of execution, because I think that really, once you have the mindset, is really a great framework to be able to, to execute on and really to be able to put all the components and pieces in place, because it's not just one thing, right? It's not just accountability. It's not just mindset. It takes a mixture of things to really be able to execute at the highest level. So I think the 4 Ds of execution is perfect to really unpack and be able to share for people to, to implement into their day-to-day to be able to execute at a higher level.
Yeah. And you nailed it. It's a framework. And what I love about it, I'm always looking for great frameworks. One of the things that makes a great framework for me is it's simple. And so there's 4 elements, 4 disciplines of execution. And so we focus on each one of those 4. What's great about that is if we're failing, there's 4 failure points that we can go back and look at and identify in each one of those 4 disciplines of execution. So I love it because, a great framework it's a starting point. And then we need to apply the framework and we develop the skill. And I think one of the things that gets missed a lot when we talk about execution is that it's a skill to develop. You need to develop it as an agent, as a team leader, as a business owner. And if you do have a team, your team has to develop the skill as well. So 4 disciplines of execution. It's the best framework that I've ever seen for executing, again, because of the simplicity. So I'll just run through the 4 real quick, and then we can kind of double click on maybe some of the failure points or any other places you want to go with it. But 4 disciplines of execution. Number 1, focus on the wildly important. So they call them WIGs in the 4 disciplines of execution, wildly important goals. We talk about that. That could be like our rocks. That could be our critical few, whatever terminology you like or use in your business. But it's our 1, 2, maybe 3 most important priorities that we're focused on right now. So you talked about getting clear and focus. How do we translate our vision all the way down to execution? It's about getting clear. It's especially when we talk about execution, it's about getting clear on the most important things we're going to work on. And it's not 5. It's certainly not 10 things, right? It's in a perfect world, it's 1 on a 90-day planning cycle. Maybe it's 2 or 3, depending on the team and the capacity, how much you guys can get done.
Yeah.
But first thing, focus on the wildly important. And that's also the first failure point too, right? Trying to do too much, focusing on too many priorities. I think it was Jim Collins who originally said, if you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have any.
Yeah.
I totally believe that. So first discipline of execution, focus on the wildly important. Just like that's a skill, saying no is a skill. Keeping on course, not drifting off of those critical few things we're going to work on. So number 1, focus on the wildly important. Number 2 is act on lead measures. So one of the failure points of execution is we focus too much on the results at the beginning of our execution, or our lagging indicators, our GCI, our revenue, the number of deals we've closed. Those are lagging indicators. Those tell us about our results. They don't tell us about our activity. So when we talk lead measures or leading indicators, we're talking about our activity. And can we directly tie our activity on a daily and weekly basis to moving the ball forward towards the wildly important goals that we're chasing? So what are some examples of this? Like we said, GCI, that's a lagging measure. What's a leading measure? That could be as simple as number of phone calls that we're making. That could be the number of leads that we're generating, the number of conversations that we're having. The important part about the leading measures is that they're focused on activity, and they're things that we can control. To be great at execution, we have to be spending time on things that we can control. I can absolutely control how many dials I make today, how many doors I knock on, how many emails I send, how many postcards get in the mail, that kind of stuff. So we have to focus on the activities, which is the leading measures for execution. If we only focus on the lagging indicators or the results, which obviously are important too, we'll find out that we wasted a lot of time, didn't get the results we want because the activity wasn't there. We ended up hoping to get a good result instead of controlling our activities.
That's so good. And I'm glad you said it, because that's, to me, is what it is. Is this within my control? We want to measure and track everything, but the emphasis has to be on the things within my control. And in the real estate game, there's only a handful of things that's within your control. Everything else is outside of your control. It's like, hey, I'm going to take a listing today. Oh, well, I hope you do, but that's not within your control, right? The client could reschedule with you. Their kid could get sick at the last minute and they have to reschedule. So when you're putting your emphasis on your weekly and daily, activities to achieve the outcomes you're after, it has to be built on those indicators at the front end. And you always have to ask yourself, is this within my control? If not, obviously we still possibly want to track it, but however, we need to shift our focus and make sure that we're doing everything that we can and hitting at least, the targets of those activities within our control.
Yeah. So on the first two, I think, and it's kind of a natural separation point, the first two and the last two. So people who tend to just be terrible at execution across the board still struggle with the first two. What we see more commonly with successful agents or successful teams is they struggle with the second two. And this is kind of where we get into the starters versus the finishers. So the second two, number 3 is keeping a compelling scorecard. So wrapped up in the idea of a scorecard is obviously we're tracking not only the lead measures, our activity, but we're also tracking the lagging measures, the results. It's also reporting. So we have to get that data into some kind of visual for us that becomes our scorecard. And then it's updating regularly and reviewing it regularly. So the scorecard is such a critical piece. And a lot of times it's the missing link between the activities and the accountability, which we'll talk about next. So discipline number 3 is keep a compelling scorecard. So have to be good at tracking, we have to be good at reporting, and then we have to build into our process, our weekly process, a time to review that scorecard so we can make adjustments if we need to.
Yeah, it is. It's so good. And the dashboard that we utilize, the Agent to CEO dashboard, it tracks everything from all the critical functions within the business. And the big thing is that we set the monthly targets, and we use red, yellow, or green, yellow, red to determine are we on pace, are we off pace, but we have a plan to get on pace, or are we off pace and we have no clue. And that's where the constraint, and then that's where we want to kind of focus on the issues for the week. And is this kind of, then we look, okay, hey, is this above the water line or below the water line? If it's below the water line, meaning what sinks ships, right? Yeah. Taking on water is what sinks ships. So if you have something that is in the red on your compelling scorecard, you have to ask yourself, hey, is this going to sink the ship, or is this just going to make the ship ugly? And so that's really where we want to pay attention to. Now, if we're in the green and we hit green, then we want to increase it. That's how we grow. So if it's green and maybe we only increase it 3%, 5%, 7%, 10%, 12%, it doesn't matter, right? Whatever that is. And so, we'll just be able to do that. And that's how you really keep and utilize a compelling scorecard.
Yeah. And the Agent to CEO scorecard is fantastic. Again, I love it. It's simple. It's easy to understand. It's easy to use. So if you guys want a copy of that, reach out to us. We can get it over to you, but it's a great tool. I use it. I use it regularly too in my business now. It's a great tool. So keep a compelling scorecard. And then number 4, create a cadence of accountability. So this is what ties everything together. And this is really what, when we talk about starters versus finishers, the accountability is really what the finishing part means. And what's tricky about it, and like you mentioned earlier, we've got who's going to build it, but then who's going to manage it. The accountability piece never goes away. we never stop having that piece because that keeps us on track. We're always going to be using our accountability cadence to look at the scorecard, to evaluate the activities, make sure that we're still focused on our wildly important goals. So the accountability piece is where most people fall off eventually. Sometimes we start great on accountability. It's really important. It's top of mind. We're going to talk about it all the time. And then we get, a few weeks later, a few months later, and it starts to drift. And that's where most people lose it in the long term, is we just let the accountability piece drift. That's why they talk about not just creating accountability, but creating a cadence of accountability. For a lot of things, that's going to be a weekly review. Especially if it's a new initiative, we're really trying to execute at a high level. We're going to probably look at it every week. Eventually, once that, whatever we're executing on is installed or implemented in the business, maybe some of those things can go down to a monthly review where we're looking at the scorecard on a monthly basis. Are we on track? Are we off track? If we're off track, why? Let's figure it out. If we're on track, do we increase the goal? But it's the cadence of accountability that's so critical, because it never goes away. Maybe the timing, like I said, goes from weekly to monthly, but the accountability cadence never goes away, or things will inevitably drift at some point. Maybe it takes a long time to drift, but if we're not looking at it, if we're not having those accountability conversations, if we're not talking about why are we off track, if we're off track, excuse me, then it's going to drift. And so we have to install the cadence of accountability, not just accountability.
Yeah, I love it. And like you said, I think there's some things that can be held accountable on a monthly basis. There's some things on a weekly basis, and then there's some things on a daily basis. It really just depends upon what it is. And I really like to see the act on lead measures. That's probably a daily accountability, right? Are we doing the things that we need to do? A lot of the scorecard stuff can be looked at on a weekly and monthly basis, and maybe even the focus on the important goals, right? Is that a weekly cadence? Is that a biweekly cadence? Is that a monthly cadence? So being able to take that into consideration, I think, really depends upon what we're trying to accomplish as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's so powerful about executing in this way is you can only really focus on a couple things at a time, right? But once they're built, when it's executed properly, your business can manage a lot of things that have been built properly. It's the building, it's the execution that's the lift. That's what takes the effort. That's what takes the energy, sometimes the money. But once it's built properly, managing it is so much less work. And also the managing of it can be done by a lower level employee versus, you might be involved in the execution part, but you shouldn't be involved in the managing. So maybe, this quarter we're super focused on new lead generation, and we're going to build great systems for our lead generation. Well, now that we have those systems built, we've got the scorecard in place, we have the accountability cadence in place. What it takes to manage that process is so much less. So then maybe next quarter we move on to, all right, we focused on lead generation. Now we're going to focus on lead conversion this quarter, and we're going to put great systems in place and execute on a plan to increase our conversion. Well, that might be a lot of work, a lot of time and energy and money into that. But once it's built and executed on properly, managing that takes so much less effort, and we can move on to the next. So where so many people fail with execution is, again, these half-built systems, and a half-built CRM takes more work than just having no CRM whatsoever. But once you get it fully built out the right way, it becomes so much less work to manage it. So our execution, what we're talking about here, is not the day-to-day running of the business. The execution is all about new projects and new priorities. And sometimes we're going to revisit them, right? We might have a quarter where we're focused on lead conversion every year, and that's one of our main priorities that we're going to execute on, and that's fine. But the day-to-day running of the business is not what we're talking about with execution. You have to maintain the execution. You have to manage it. You have to make sure the accountability doesn't drift. You have to make sure you don't abandon your scorecards. But what we're talking about is new things in the business, either fixing big problems or chasing big opportunities. It's not just the data.